validating your startup, getting caught up in jargon. Everyone wants on the IoT train, Uber financials, and type forming. Yes, I use it as a verb. All that and more, so stay tuned. This is a Security Weekly production. Welcome everyone to Startup Security Weekly. This is it's episode 8. 8 even. That is right. We are now in 8-bit format. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, broadcasting live from G Unit Studios in Rhode Island on the lines via Skype. None other than Michael Santarcangelo. Welcome, Michael.
Good day, sir. Felt like Jeff on that one.
Always excited to do Startup Security Weekly, especially when we get to reference Silicon Valley. I think every show there's going to be like an Easter egg, like where is Paul's reference to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I'll start planning for that better.
That's right. On the other shows might be Mr. Robot references, which is way overdone, by the way. People are just going way too crazy on Mr. Robot. We get it. It's a good show. It's technically accurate. Okay, calm down.
Yeah, I've gone the other side. You know, it's funny because we were talking about startups and stuff. I took all the games off my computers and my phones and my devices. I have limited device use. We turn off the TV at night. I've been really just kind of focusing a lot more, trying that crazy thing called sleep. So
yeah. Some people tell me that sleep is good. I guess
I read about it one time. I'm not saying I'm getting any. I'm just saying I'm trying.
Yeah. So what's going on in the world of startups?
Well, we got a slate this week. Again, looking at topics, and I've started to have some people reach out and talk about some of the challenges. And so I've continued to look for some of the stories and some insights that let us reveal a little bit more about that. And a lot of people are still talking about the challenge of gaining traction, the challenge of getting people to pay attention to what it is that they're doing, to get that first meeting, to get the follow-up meeting, and that type of stuff. So we'll talk about that. But as we segue into that, I want to say one of the things that's interesting to me is I'm still very excited about what's happening in the security market space today, and I'm really optimistic about it. Lately, the pitches and the briefings that I've been taking, I'm seeing a couple trends, and so I'm kind of curious, Paul, if you're seeing these, and I'm curious if any of our listeners are seeing these. I'm seeing where we're coming up and saying, you know what? We don't need to recreate the wheel. There's other people that have got models that are good. We want to try to adopt them and use them to improve security. I'm a big fan of that because it's true. We don't need to recreate the wheel. The other thing I'm starting to see, and this is a lot of fun, is I'm watching people use concepts that we might have talked about 20 years ago but never really figured out. Didn't have the bandwidth, didn't have the disk space, didn't have the processor power, didn't have any of those things. But now we do. Now we can. And I'm kind of digging that. And so it's still interesting.
Along those lines, Michael, I find it's still a long curve in my time space continuum, right? It's a long curve. Like, I'm talking to companies today that are like, yeah, we're collecting all these logs, we're storing in the cloud, we're applying data science, or they call it, machine learning and all those. Well, we'll talk about jargon, but basically data science that is actually helping people today. But I'm finding out that this research dates back like 15, 20 years ago, and these companies weren't created until like 2009, 2010, and now they're just starting to gain traction. So it's kind of like a long tail for me, but I think we're starting to see some of those companies have an impact, and investors are putting money in it, and we're seeing this kind of explosion. My concern is what happens when it starts to consolidate, and I think largely my concerns are unfounded. There's going to be some consolidation, but I think there's always going to be insecurity, these kind of like bubbles that come up and then get a little bit of consolidation. But I truly believe we're going to see growth, maybe forever in security, but that's just me being optimistic.
No, I mean, I think that you're right on that. And I also think that what you pointed out is an interesting perspective, which is some of this stuff has existed for 15 or 20 years. I mean, or some of the research was done even earlier than that.
Right.
And either the market wasn't ready for it, right? It was kind of like
Yes.
solving a problem that people don't really have yet, or they have it, but they don't understand it. And that's actually probably a good way to segue into some of the stuff we're talking about today. The first story we pulled up is how to validate your startup idea. What'd you think of it?
I thought this was a great article, by the way.
Is that because it referenced Silicon Valley?
Well, no, and this medium.com is becoming a favorite of mine, and he really lays out in extraordinary detail this concept of how to validate your idea. I don't believe for a second that the majority of people go through this level of validation with their ideas, and I'll venture to guess that 0% of everyone's first startup went through this much validation. I think your second or third startup, you're like, yeah, I should probably validate and get ahead of some of this stuff.
Yeah, I'll tell you, some of this to me was intense in terms of what you're asking or how to ask it. So I look at it in two ways, because I think too it's potential that you get so wrapped around the axle trying to answer all of these questions perfectly that you don't launch, you don't get going, you don't figure it out,
and then you're late to market, which is not. It's not a horrible thing, but it definitely has its impacts.
First mover still has an advantage, but the other part to it too that I've started to figure out is if you wait even just a little bit to launch, you're really not learning. Like the biggest thing I figured out in the last couple of weeks, and I alluded to this on the last program. I finally got that blog post written up. It's this: if you launch, right? I could talk to you all day about something I'm working on or something I'm thinking about, and if all you're doing is listening to feedback and talking to me, that's great. When you flip it and you say, okay, so I've created it and I'm ready to sell it, oh, it's a different conversation. It's a very different conversation. And then people treat it differently. And the feedback that they give you, I find, is significantly more valuable. And so there's a right point. We've talked about this before, but what I've kind of figured out is there's a right point where you feel like you're almost ready, but not quite. That's when you go.
Well, and I think a lot of it, how much of this validation you go through also depends on how costly it is to come up with your minimum viable product. That's a huge factor.
That's a great point. I also think it has to do with your experience. You and I were talking about this a little bit before we got recording. If you've been in the industry for 20 years and what you're doing is born of the problems that you're trying to solve, right? So it's a problem somebody brought to you or a problem you've already been solving,
right?
And you figured it out, and then you're looking around going, a lot of people have this problem. Okay, I think we can make a go of it. And that's a different strategy than I want to start a business, and I've been looking around and I've got this idea. And maybe it's a good idea, and maybe you are driven really well, but you're kind of new to it, so you're not really sure. So with that in mind, too, especially looking at security, I think the other part to it is a lot of people in security, a lot of people in technology, we have impressions of what sales is like. We have impressions of what HR does or doesn't do. We have impressions of all these things, and there's no real substitute for experience. I'll tell you, one of the things that I loved on this article in particular was it was started with the secondary research, which was talking about reading other people's work. I mean, I used to just call it a literature review, but it's kind of fascinating because I don't know if you've done this. I do this actually a lot. Like I'll go type in the phrases that I'm working on, or I'll type in the terms. And I want to see what other people are writing, and I want to see what they're doing about it. There's something that's interesting here I want to point out too, and I'll quote from it just because it's easier. If you've got a good idea, it's very possible someone else has had the same idea and executed on it or tried to execute on it, so that analysis is important. One of the lessons I learned really early on is that if nobody else has the idea, you're either an idiot or a genius, and you've got to go do more work to figure it out, right? Like It's either you've got something and nobody else has it. Keep in mind, if you're that first person and you're really pushing that headwind, go back to your comment, some of this research was done 15, 20 years ago. You've now got to educate the entire marketplace. I like it where people are...
But sometimes that works out, Michael.
It can.
I was talking to someone yesterday. I was actually in the cigar industry, but started out in tech in the late 90s, early 2000s. And over the course of his journey, he described, I sat down with a couple of, my cousin's friends or something like that. And It had this like crazy idea that, from your phone, you could put in a request and some random person would come pick you up. And then I had to give them my credit card, which would never work. And I don't want to get into a stranger's car and you guys, you're on crack. And then he's like, yeah, that was Uber. So, I think Uber is a good example. And you had a bonus story in here about Uber. How about they're not making money, which I find interesting. But some, like in the beginning, Uber was on the side of the idiots, right? Everyone was like, you're an idiot. Even Mark Cuban's like, I screwed up, dude. I could have invested in Uber and I didn't because of all those reasons that are common sense at the time. But I find it, as someone with a startup, very encouraging that you can come to market with this idea that everyone thinks is absolutely crazy in the beginning and be in a position where you've reached the masses and everyone knows of Uber. Now, whether you're making money or not, that's a different story.
But here's
I think they're big enough now that it doesn't really matter, like kind of like they'll make money eventually kind of thing.
Well, see, and we'll talk about that when we get to the bonus story. Let's go back to the market validation. I don't know the whole history of what they did from a validation perspective, but what I do think is fascinating is that early on, Uber said, okay, right, you could just do one, right? Uber black car, Uber whatever. It was one type of vehicle and in one city and only certain times, right? So it's like it was an exceptionally controlled minimum viable product.
Yes.
They didn't try to be everything for everybody. Everybody could sign up and make it all work. They basically said, okay, I think we've got enough to make it figure out, and probably said where are the biggest congestion of people that are most likely to do something like this so we can figure it out. And so if you start looking at what it takes to validate, they did some of that initial literature review, they probably did some of that code development, and then they were exceptionally selective on how all the other pieces of it work, and they used that to both validate them and inform wherever they went next. What they started with and what they have today are nothing in close. And what's interesting about that is that's what really encourages me, right? So I'm in the middle of doing my first launch, and I am learning a lot in the process. But I've talked to other people, looked at other people that they're like, yeah, you got to get to that first one, and then it'll build, and there's stuff you can do, and so that gets me kind of excited. So here's the stuff I liked, and if you're in this situation, it's really good. He talks about the primary research design. So he starts with the secondary research. That says, go just do a literature review, read the stuff you can read, start to figure it out. I'm starting to like the sites that ask questions where you can kind of see what's on people's minds and get a sense of what's up, and I like that a lot. But then he says, okay, so go design a research survey. And I really like the way he does this, like write a list of hypotheses out. So he gives examples about how he thinks that'll work. Then go try to write, now, I'll tell you, this is tougher than you think. Write a list of unbiased questions to survey people to see if your hypotheses are valid. Unbiased, that's really tough. Some of the survey companies, like SurveyMonkey now, actually has a whole clinically tested, certified question bank you can borrow from. There's others that can do stuff like that for you or get some help on that. And then, start working with people. But what's also interesting here, and I agree this is important, when you administer the questions, don't tell them about the idea or product until the survey is complete, because then you're going to start, a new set of questions on it. One of the things I've learned in a lot of years of doing survey work with people is invariably, if you tell them what you don't want, the first thing they're going to answer is exactly what you told them what to do. So like if you're like, I'd like you to, pick a number between 5 and 10, but don't make it 7. They're like, okay, 7. They're like, no, I said, don't make it 7, right? 7. Okay. So what you start to find up in this design is you definitely keep it simple. Figure out the basic stuff that you want to hypothesize and then go forward with it. And what I'm learning too is just like 3 questions are good. Just simple. Simple is, especially when you're getting started out, which I like a lot. The other thing, we've talked about this before, just talking to people is good.
Yeah.
We talked about this in the last show, right? Like forming jokes, like telling your friends about it. You're so funny. Telling everybody else about it, they're like, yeah, that's not funny. Right, like it's that feedback kind of changes.
Yeah. I'm still kind of fascinated with the Uber concept and how they identified that problem early on. Some people must have said that there was a problem, or maybe they didn't realize there was a problem until they explained it. I'm not sure which side you fall on. We always like to recommend that you solve a problem that people have. And they're like, yeah, that's a problem. But I mean, sometimes it takes time in the market to make people understand that there's a better way to do things. So, stick with it, I guess, is my advice.
Yeah, well, I think if we're looking at it too from a market validation perspective, this Uber, Airbnb, and a number of other things came around the same time, and it created this new concept of the sharing economy, and that caught people's fancy just because of the nature of it. And I'm still kind of surprised at the number of people that were really willing to embrace that, the early adopters of it. Like, sure, I'll ride in somebody else's car that I've never met, that I'm sure is okay.
Right.
And yeah, I'll stay at somebody else's house.
Yeah.
And that also means somebody said, sure, I'll let somebody else stay in my house. Maybe I'm just too much into security. That all feels awkward to me. But they've proven that it works, or maybe they haven't. That's what our bonus conversation today will be. But I guess what we've learned is the jargon kills you. I mean, that's the second one we put in. I mean, I couldn't resist putting this story into our lineup.
I live this every week on Enterprise Security Weekly when we wade through everyone's press releases and blog posts and announcement, like their marketing materials to say, and in that space, right? It's not so much a startup, but startups struggle with this too in the messaging on their websites. When you're established and not in startup mode, and you start having a more formal messaging plan, which includes press releases. So you're announcing new products, new product features, integrations, partners, all of that stuff. Like, something happens to the jargon, Michael, where you read it and you're like, I still don't understand what they just did. Like, it's just so infused with marketing terminology that the message is completely lost.
Yeah, and look, you've worked on the marketing side, so it's not just. I want to be clear. It's not that anybody's to blame. It's. I think it's a couple of things. There's both an art and there's a level of effort you've got to put in to translate something into an experience and into words that work. I mean, I've been guilty of it too. We get excited about something and we like the artfulness of however we've described it.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether that works or not. But the other thing we see a lot of times too, especially from a marketing sales perspective, is, well, so-and-so did that and it got a lot of attention. All right, we'll do it too.
Yep.
Yeah,
there's a lot of Me Too.
No,
like
I'll follow that too.
They talked about APT and they used cyber and they, nation state hacking and ransomware. So we have to include all of that stuff too. It's like, no. Hold on, back up. Tell me what it does. Please, can we just get it? Like, I would say that all the time. I'm like, can we just say what it does? Really? I mean, I understand there's examples and there's reference points that you want to hit on, but the people that understand your audience, the people that are reading it, they just want to know basically your tagline, Michael. What problem are you trying to solve, and how do you solve it? Right?
Yeah, I mean, well, because if you break it down and you start looking at it, it's that whole, are you focusing on benefits or are you focusing on features? And how well do you understand that problem? So did you do your market research properly? And then when you're connected with somebody, I mean, the thing that we always forget, and I get it, we especially when you're in a startup, but security, a lot of security companies, even if they're established, have the same feeling, which is, if I'm not making a sale, I'm losing a sale, which is absolutely the wrong way to think about it. Because somebody may not have that problem right now, or they may not have that awareness of the problem right now, but somebody else does. And so the thing is, the quicker you can explain what you do in a way that somebody either goes, ha, got it, need that, or no, don't need that. In fact, I never just go. That's okay. Like, it's not personal. It's okay. You got to figure it out. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some of these things that they're talking about, which are just absolutely fantastic. This one's great. We visually organize your email and cloud-based content for ultra-fast access. It's visual storytelling with any type of content. I got no idea what this means, and neither does the author. And he says, so I asked the guy if he can explain this more clearly. And he says, quote, we have a library that's just the feed of content. You can search content by type. I have 5 email accounts in my Dropbox account here. So if I'm looking for a PDF document, here's a stream of all my PDF documents from these accounts using a visual interface. What? I mean, I don't. know that I have that problem, so I'm not inclined to particularly act on that. But gosh,
But
the stuff.
a lot of it too, Michael, is they're not. It's something I don't think we've really talked about. Is they're not describing the problem efficiently and effectively.
Right, they're describing their features,
Yes.
not even
Yes.
the benefits. Like, why do I care? Like, right. So it goes back to your point, right? Benefits should be tied to the pain point or to the problem. By the way, I want to point out too. I get that, especially in security, we tend to focus on pain a lot. There's two parts to the coin, right? There's the affliction, that's your pain, and then there's your aspiration. And I think the ideal is give me that story that does both. Show me how you can solve that problem so I can reach that aspiration, that or what you'll hear me call a lot the better tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, we fall into jargon, and I think it's because we get so close to it that we sometimes forget what it's like to talk to somebody else. So when you're doing your market research, listen to the words. This is the biggest thing
Yeah.
I've picked up in the last couple of months. Listen to the words that somebody explains whatever you do right back to you, and then write that down. And then if you start getting the same pattern, right, you can test it all out, and that's going to help you cut down to the chase.
Well,
I'll tell
and
you.
I think a lot of times it ends up is too much of a generalization. Like the problem statement for the thing you just read is, well, everyone has problems finding things. It's like, well, yeah, but we all know that that's going to be an ongoing problem, and you need to be more specific and say, hey, have you ever been late for a meeting because you couldn't find the proposal that you were looking for? So being more specific about the problem and giving examples
Missed
is
the
much
sale,
better.
missed the deadline, didn't get
Yeah,
something done.
exactly.
Right?
That's
Make
the.
it make
I mean,
sense.
yes, the general problem is I can't find things, but you have to put context around. And we do that in vulnerability management all the time. Yeah, the problem is that you have vulnerabilities and there's missing patches, right? But what are the repercussions of that? Those are the real problems that people are, putting out fires all the time because they've been breached. And so the problem that you want to highlight to people is, yes, you're getting breached. We understand that's a problem. One of the causes is this, and here's a solution.
Yep, yep. And so all I would point out with this is, and I'll be upfront. This is where I used to ask the second question of the framework was what how tall to ride, and it has been drilled into my head that was really artful on my part and fun when I'm doing it, but not really helpful. And based on the feedback of enough folks, we've tailored it into are we ready? But what's great about that is now that I've fully embraced it, wow, the depth of it's great. And I'll do some updates on that shortly. But here's the thing then. If whichever side you're on, if you're listening to somebody drown on with this stuff, or if you're on the other side saying, man, it feels like we're saying what everybody else is saying. If you just ask yourself these two questions, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, or that we solve, or however you want to do it? And are we ready? Or you could say, are they ready? You're really going to help a lot of people cut through that noise really fast. And for me, it's funny. A lot of this started with all the threat intel stuff, because threat intel, right? That was on the heels of all the APT stuff. Threat intel, threat intel, threat intel, threat intel, threat intel. Right? So I'd say, well, what does that mean? I mean, Paul, I'd have people like, well, it's about the telemetry of your network across a number of access points. And I was like, what the hell are you even talking about?
Yeah.
And then I'd say, okay, well, what do I need to have in place for this to work, right? That's now are we ready?
Mm-hmm.
And they go, oh, no, it works for everybody. I'm like, that's not even remotely possible.
No.
Oh, no.
And it's
everybody.
not even remotely true either in that particular situation. And I think, more smartly people, when they ask, well, what is threat intelligence? And you say context. Oh, okay. Well, now we're on to something, right?
Yeah. Except for that's still requiring people to understand. So you need to follow that up with a pretty good example fast.
Yeah.
So let's bring this back for a second then, right? Because one of the things that I think is important when we look at stuff is we use the perspective. So if you're the startup doing something like this and you find yourself using that jargon, or if you're not sure, you need to call somebody. You need to say to them, hey, is this jargon? Is the way I'm explaining this make sense? And if they say yes, because a lot of people are not going to want to hurt your feelings, say, do you feel comfortable explaining this to somebody else based on what I've shared with you?
Right. That's
if you're a buyer, learn to ask the questions. I'm upfront with people. I don't want to hear your pitch, but I'm going to ask you some questions. I want you to answer them for me. They don't have to like it, but I'm also comfortable guiding them. So it's not just to be a jerk to them. It's just to say, let me just help you get down to the substance faster. And that kind of works out. But if you're an investor, you've got to ask those same types of questions. You've got to get comfortable at saying, Right. But what do you do, and who does that? And how do you know they have that problem? What does it look like? How would I recognize if somebody else had that problem? Do
Mm.
they know that they have that problem? Are they willing to pay to solve that problem? And then all I would say on this from a startup perspective is in the beginning, stay small, stay narrow, just like Uber did, just like a lot of other people do. You'll talk to somebody who's like, oh, and you could use this to do X, Y, and Z. Yep. And one day we might, but I'm not even going to put it on the roadmap today. I mean,
Yeah,
thanks.
because
Like you got to keep that focus.
crawl before you walk, right?
Yeah.
And it's good to have plans and vision. Like I'm sure the Uber guys had the plans and vision, right, to take it where they've taken it, and I'm sure they had help along the way. But speaking of jargon, I came up with my own jargon called type forming.
Yeah. Typeform would probably love that.
Type, because they have this specific strategy, and reading the article, it looks like they're doing it really well. So I dubbed it type forming. I created my own jargon because we
I
had a
think that
story
they
about
probably
jargon.
like that. Look, I'll tell you, I've switched to using Typeform. I kind of did like I looked at all the different survey tools, including SurveyMonkey and what you paid for it and how it integrated and what it worked on, and I stumbled across Typeform, and I'm enjoying the experience. I like the way that it looks. I like the way that it acts. I'm still trying to understand. I mean, we talk about how startups make money. They've got their free plan is really robust, and then it kind of jumps in price. So it goes from free to starting at 35 a month to starting at 70 a month. So like it jumps really fast. But
That's
that
kind of
said,
interesting.
on the number of things you get at the free plan are actually pretty compelling, and clearly they're making money. So here's what caught my eye. The headline is how Typeform uses Bonusly, which to be fair I haven't really checked out yet, and merit money for motivation. So that part's interesting to me because what it's talking about is the culture of your startup. And we've not talked about that a lot on this program yet. It's something that I've been interested in for a while because one of the things we talk about in the security space, and I'm pretty much on record for disagreeing with it, is that we don't have enough people. We've got a shortage. I don't see it. I mean, I see everybody talking about it. But the culture is how you're going to sort yourself out. The companies that have good culture, the companies that reward their people, the places where you're excited to be and you feel that you're part of something. Yeah, they're not hurting for people right now. They're getting good people. What's
Yeah,
your take on culture and the importance of culture? Because we'll talk about how they're doing it, and I'm curious some of your take on this as a guy in a startup.
I think for me, I think that when you have a business like a startup that's moving so fast, I feel like it's easy to fall into the trap of, well, this is just kind of how we started, so we're just going to continue this culture, and you're not
That's
putting
a
as
good
much
point.
thought into the culture probably as you should. And not to say that it's. I mean, I don't think it's ever too late to change the culture. I mean, maybe the more employees you have, the harder it is to change the culture. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but I think it's really important to have a culture in your startup or your business that is. I think the primary goal there, Michael, is to keep talented people, right? I mean, and that's one of the things I learned really early on about business is you have to learn how to keep talented people working for you, and not somewhere else, especially your competitors. So
Well, and I think it's a great way to look at this. So what Typeform is doing is they've created it's this concept. We'll take a look at. It's called Management 3.0. I got to be fair, as somebody who looks at leadership and management all the time, right? So you lead people, you manage process, you boss nobody. Management 3.0 looks a lot like it's going to be muddling up management versus leadership, etc. For now, I'm going to set that aside. And if I'm wrong, I'll come back and I'll admit that I'm wrong on it. But what they're looking at is this concept of merit money. And really what it means, and it's a little bit better. And I've seen this in operate in different ways, but what they're basically saying is it's about peer recognition. So here's a quote from this. Peers publicly acknowledging each other with a note of recognition and perhaps some points, some money, some hearts, hugs, or something, but that it ultimately converts into a real cash, a gift, or a gift card. And so they're an app using an app to track how they like everything. But what's interesting about it is it's an opportunity to thank somebody. It's an opportunity to say, hey, good job. And then as you get down, and this is the next headline, and I think this is the key. Well, they say it's values based. It's not outcome focused. What I'm going to say is that to me, I'm interested in the process of stuff. So if you want to call that values based, that's great. But it's not the outcome. It's not, hey, Paul, good job. You saved us $100,000. I'll give you 2 thumbs up, right? Because that ends up creating an interest in the outcome, not the process. But what I've been studying with startups, with business, with leadership, with communication, with sports, with everything, it's the system. It's the process that you follow and your adherence to it. I'm a fan of football, and if you go look at college football in specific, the winningest coaches, they've got a program. It's a system, and they both recruit players that can work in that system, but then they elevate those players through that system. And the better they get at that system, the better that they do. So what I like about this, and it gives you ideas here, they say right now at Typeform, they're tagging teamwork and leadership and problem solving, innovation, vision, helping somebody out, etc. I mean, to me, I'm looking at, I like those, and I would reward, frankly, I would reward accountability. I would reward communication. I would reward ownership of things. I would reward, I like innovation, or, I hear people call it ideation a lot. I'm actually,
I think for me, if employees are improving on the process that you've built, that is extremely important, right? I mean,
that's a great point.
That contributes to just so many great things about the organization. And I think the other thing you said, Michael, is peer review. So not just peer review for people doing exceptional things, but I think one of the most exceptional things is improving upon the process, which also speaks to improving communication and teamwork. But I think the peer review is important. A company that I used to work for, they would, they'd have 2 things, right? If you did something really bad, you got presented a brick and you had to keep that on your desk, which was interesting. But then, like a lot of organizations, and I think some organizations still do this, but I think more and more we see companies like Typeform doing something a little different. But they just kind of have like an award ceremony. Like, hey,
right.
Management got together and we decided you're awesome, so you're getting a bonus, and you're awesome, and you're getting a bonus. And then everyone else is sitting there like, well, I thought I was awesome too, but I didn't get recognition.
Right? And here's a bonus for you, and here's a bonus for you, and everybody gets a bonus. Yeah, it's funny. I've watched it work in both ways, because I've actually gone into some organizations to support their leaders, and I've actually had people pull me aside and say, hey man, they went to the mat for me, they got me a cash award that made a big difference, I really appreciate that. So I get that. So here's the thing I think is interesting in this, and it's that because Typeform's using Bonusly and they've gamified it to a certain extent, they've made it easy and they've made it part of their culture to keep acknowledging each other. And somebody said, okay, look, it doesn't affect my day-to-day motivation, but it's a really nice surprise when somebody recognizes me for what I did. I think that's an interesting twist, because as you were just describing, and I said, thank you. I mean, we've all had this. Somebody, I read the latest management book, or I read the latest leadership book, and I came in and I said, it says, good leaders say hi to the people every day. Hi, Paul. How are you today? And I had a guy, like, I swear every Monday was some new thing. And I'm like, what book did you read this weekend?
Yeah.
Like, oh, the crazy, like, we have a big, remember Big Mouth Bass Billy, Billy, whatever it's called. And if you press the button, the fish like would sing on the wall. Yeah, so he bought one of those because in his book, he read that startups have just the craziest cultures, and this would be our crazy culture, right?
You'd be a talking fish in his office. That's going to make us successful.
We were wildly successful as a result. So what I thought was just kind of interesting is kind of like when we do the show, if somebody says something nice to us, and it helps us feel good when somebody says, hey, you brought up a story, or you brought up a perspective and it helped me get better at what I did. That's like, well, okay, it feels good. You don't need money associated with it, so it feels good. So I'll be curious to see how it all kind of plays out. It does have this though. It has 6 rules. And of course, it says it's backed by science, right? Stand back, I'm doing science. But I want to point these out because I like some of these things quite a bit. You don't promise a reward in advance. You keep an anticipated reward small. You reward continuously, not just once. You reward publicly, not privately. You reward the behaviors, not just the outcomes. And you reward peers, not just subordinates.
Yeah, that's a good summary.
There is a lot of science behind that, but I kind of like it as long as it's part of the culture. and it helps everybody feel better, it's good. What I would say is, if you're a startup and you're doing it, I like it. I like focusing on it earlier rather than later. Um, but I wouldn't let this be a big distraction. That's some of the stuff I thought was interesting.
No, good advice. Sound advice.
How about IoT? Because I feel like it's a show if we don't talk about it.
I want a smart toothbrush, Michael. After I read this, I want one.
I'll tell you what, the thing that really stood out at me, because again, we talk about startups and we're talking about security, and you can't go a day without seeing a headline about IoT. But this line in particular is the one that really captured me. A toothbrush is worth $5 by itself. A toothbrush that tracks how well you brush your teeth can be sold for many times that amount. The toothbrush company goes from creating plastic handles and bristles to producing electronic devices with transmitters, sensors, and more. This can be a great thing for that company. It expands its reach and makes it a more tempting target for investors. I'll go a step further. We're starting to see this now. We're seeing traditional retailers and traditional clothing companies or whatever else, as they move into the wearables and they move into the digital realm of it, they're now selling you subscriptions.
Right. Which attracts investors more than anything else.
Absolutely. And so instead of just saying, hey, we sold X number of units and X billions of dollars, we have X millions of subscribers giving us X amount of money per month, and all of that data and all of that information.
Yeah,
and that's
the
where
part.
the real opportunities of this lie. So a lot of times in security, we look at it and say, well, it's the device. They're using insecure protocols. We don't like the chipsets that they're using. We're not sure about how they're protecting the physical side to it, and more of the networking side that we understand. What kind of clicked for me, and I'm sure we've talked about it, but reading it that way, I went, oh, so what we're collectively calling Internet of Things, whether you like that distinction or not, the real security opportunity is going to be bigger. What are people doing with it? What are they gathering? So yes, how are they gathering it? What do the sensors look like? That's all still going to factor into this, but I think something to start thinking about if you're interested in this is, how am I going to connect those companies together? How am I going to connect what they're learning together? How are we going to provide privacy in the age of overconnect?
Because every time we talk about one of these devices, I come up with an example. So we have the benefit that I get to know how well or not so well I'm brushing my teeth for my own personal health and hygiene. And people look at that as a good thing. They're like, yeah, I want that. And then I say, well, what happens when the company that makes that toothbrush is sharing your results with your dental insurance, which is being adjusted based on how well or not so well you're brushing your teeth? Sure, if you do it all the time, you might get a discount. If you slack on it, then maybe your dental insurance goes up. And this is there in any IoT device, not most of them, we can come up with this kind of example. And I just think that's scary for security and privacy.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because there's a plus minus, and we've already seen this happen in the auto insurance marketplace, where we say, oh, you've got a classic car that doesn't do any telemetry at all. Well, here, you've got a port. I'm going to give you this thing. You plug it into the port. It's going to give us the data. And if you're a good driver, we're going to give you a discount. Oh, and P.S. if you're not a good driver, well, your rate's going to go a little higher.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is from an insurance and from a market perspective, if you're giving me more accurate information and you're allowing me to price it better, I mean, from a classic perspective, that's really good. Where that's going to start to come into play, though, then, is if it is used to include or exclude people entirely. So, like you could look at it on one hand and go, whoa, I don't want my rate to go up. That's not fair. Well, that's not necessarily an accurate statement. If their information is more properly calibrated, it's entirely fair. You may not like it, but it's certainly more equitable than other types of things. But now the question starts to come into, what does that mean? But do you get excluded from certain benefits because you did or didn't take certain actions? And how much do you want people to know about you? One of the things, at least in the U.S., that we prize is some level of, I would say typically we like privacy, but really what we prefer is anonymity. And a lot of people don't get those. They get those confused. But
no, because if my toothbrush is just a number and they're collecting general statistics to improve their product or improve the overall state of dental care in the world, okay, That's cool. And like you said, anonymity is that's exactly what that means.
But we know too that any of these things that have that, once I get two pieces of data on you or
Yes,
three,
you
I
can
can
figure out who
triangulate
did.
almost anything.
Yeah,
So
big data. I know, I
so
agree. But the other interesting thing, though, Michael, is what if attackers start to attack this infrastructure so they can make it
right,
look like I'm never brushing my teeth, that
exactly.
my fridge is talking to my health insurance company, and now the attackers are making it look like I'm eating nothing but bad, greasy food. So my health insurance goes up, and they're making it seem like I drive like a complete maniac so that my car insurance goes up, or I lose all of my insurance altogether.
There you
So
go.
integrity of these products, once we start reaching this point of them talking to other and sharing, which is already happening at a certain level, becomes very, very crucial, which means security is important, not just on a product level, but for all of the consumers in the world. Security and privacy is extremely important as technology creeps its way into every aspect of our
And we're
lives.
watching it grow more important, but what we're not seeing yet is a very comfortable translation. The fluency is not catching up with it. So let's go back. If you're on that startup side, invest some time in being able to explain those different elements to it. I know you're excited because you figured out A, B, or C. And if you're a security startup, you're going to have to help people understand the implications. You can't just say, "Well, it's privacy." They
Hmm.
go, "Well, I don't care. Who cares if I brush my teeth?" But if you go too far in a direction of, well, and then they're going to come arrest you because you didn't brush your teeth. Yeah, that's also not believable. You got to go find real, credible examples where that type of thing has happened and can continue to happen. The other thing to look at, though, in the same vein, is if you're that buyer side. So you're in this company and you're part of that transformation. And the leadership of your organization and your board is saying, okay, we don't want to just produce widgets anymore. We want to produce widgets that can talk to other widgets that give us information that people will subscribe to. You've got questions to
Yeah.
ask. And,
In
and
a good strategy, in one you can borrow from software, and we see this every day, those of us that use software, my web browser, my operating system, a lot of applications that I have say, hey, do you want to opt in so that if something bad happens, it sends the data to us? And it gives you the option of sharing data or not. And that's what I'm not seeing with a lot of these companies. There's actually a sex toy manufacturer that was collecting information. There's no opt out. I mean, it could be completely anonymous, but it still should be left to the consumer whether or not they want to share data from their software or devices with anyone, and what level of sharing happens, and being very clear on how you're sharing it, although sometimes companies lie. But it should be left to the end user. It should be a choice.
Yeah, and I think that's a fundamental shift that, it's interesting you bring that up because I've had that conversation a couple times this week. And I think then that's our opportunity. So whichever side of this you're on, you're the investor, you're the consumer, a business or direct to consumer side, or you're that startup. These are the conversations that you want to get people into. And these are the conversations, frankly, that we want to keep having because I think that's how we're going to start to make some of these changes. There's an element to a lot of this that is absolutely fascinating. It's going to create better experiences because we can get more information, and that information informs choices and does all sorts of fun stuff. There's a downside to that, and we just need to be candid about these things and know why we're making the choices we're making, what the potential trade-offs are. Let's go back to security. I'm working right now on a different project to look at some physical security and some systems. I also have a budget limitation, right? It's not for my house. It's for one of the organizations I do some work with. All right, so I got a budget limitation and I've got a particular set of needs. So when we're putting our bid package together, we're saying, okay, this is what we think our minimum requirements are. You're welcome to disagree with us. But either way, you need to help us understand the choices that you've made and what our operational trade-offs are so we can make a better decision.
Mm.
That's not typical. And actually, we're finding a couple of people are like, wait, what are you asking me again exactly?
Mm.
So all I'm saying is, as we're going into the IoT, we have an opportunity in security to be the folks helping them connect these things together. Security does not have to be at odds with usability. It does not have to be at odds with anything. So if you're a startup looking at IoT, you can include security in it and you will be better off, especially down the road. But if you're a security company, you have the ability to start looking at how this type of stuff works. And I think you've got just as big an opportunity, especially since we're seeing big companies are really getting into this. And on that, what would you do if Target or Walmart or the likes of them came, Paul, and said, hey, we're going to run an accelerator. Do you guys want to be part of it?
Yeah, we see a lot of companies doing this. Microsoft just recently launched a program as well,
That's right.
Michael. And yeah, I mean, because these big companies, they want to stay nimble and cool. And being in the startup world, I think maybe helps them feel that way. I'm not sure what the direct benefit is to Walmart and Target. To maybe it's information gathering, maybe it's
I think sometimes it's
shaping their
early access.
early access to. Maybe it's a company they want to buy. Maybe it's they want to just integrate it. Because didn't Walmart? They didn't buy a startup, but they just bought a huge
They bought
e-commerce
Jet.com.
Jet.com, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a good move for Walmart and Target.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting thing, especially too, because we keep talking about STEM and my big push is for STEAM, so arts with it, and I think there's a good opportunity there. What I liked was, so it's the enterprise saying, okay, we want to have more of the startup mentality. Okay, what's the fastest way to get that? Let's go bring some startups in.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
if you're a startup, what's the challenge that you have, right? We've talked about some of this already. So there's a need sometimes for space. There's a need sometimes for cash. There's always a need for validation. There's a need for somebody to test it. So when these huge companies say, okay, we're only going to have 10 teams come in or 20 teams come in, but we're going to give you the space. We're going to give you support, right? Especially if that support is, we've got, right, people who know marketing. We've got people who
Hmm.
understand legal. We're going to help you with all of that and use us as a test bed. I think that's awesome. And what I like about it too is it's not necessarily that you're in a incubator or that you're in an
Yeah.
accelerator or that you had to take on seed funding or you had to do anything else. Now, obviously, the terms of all these kind of come up. Now, what I also thought was interesting though, and I still like it. I think it's all in how you run it. It was, I think it was Neiman Marcus. I'm trying to find it real quick here. But somebody recently did something like this and then said, you know what? It's Nordstrom. Nordstrom did it.
Hmm.
And Nordstrom did something like this for a couple years and then said, you know what? We don't need an innovation lab. Our whole company's innovative. This is why when we talk about the fact that on this program, we're a combination of the security of business and the business of security, looking at it from a startup perspective. The deeper we get into this, Paul, and the more I'm looking at the enterprise side, there's a lot of people who want this mindset. They need this mindset. Maybe one way to get that is to bring some of these folks into your organization. I think it's interesting if somebody says, okay, well, we did it for a couple of years and now we've got it. Uh,
Yeah. No, it's an ongoing process. Michael, sorry, in the interest of time, because we have one more quick story about Uber losing 1.2 billion, and then an update on our journey. My journey continues at 3 o'clock, so
Gotcha.
got a meeting for my
Well,
journey.
this 1.2 billion. So Uber lost 1.2 billion dollars this year. So the bottom line is they're not making money. They're not making a profit.
Well, and they
Um,
and they haven't. Well, the number was what 2 billion in 2015 and 4 billion the year
Four
before
billion
that. Yeah,
overall,
four
7 years.
billion
By the
in
way,
its 7 year
they've been
history.
operating for 7 years. They've lost $4 billion. Now, what it says is they're claiming that they're profitable in the U.S., but it's pushing into these new markets that's really costing them a lot of money.
Interesting.
We're watching blowback. I mean, Uber is great because everybody loves them, and so everybody's always writing about them, and so you get a lot of insights. Here's the point I was going to make. Just because you got a big valuation, just because you're a big company, just because you become a verb as a company, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be successful. Now, as you've pointed out, with the amount of money that they have and the amount of advisors that they have, it's likely that they will figure it out, and
Yeah.
likely that they will make a profit. But it's just one of those things to look at. And the reason I'm holding it out is a lot of people say, "Oh, we're just like the Uber of, or we're like Uber." Yeah, you don't have to be.
Well,
You can
and
be you.
I
You can
think
be good.
when you're talking about a company now of that size and that popularity, the fact that they're bleeding less money means they're on the right track. I think that any negative reaction comes from the fact that they're like, well, we're projected to be profitable in the U.S. So if you're projecting to turn a profit and you come up $1.2 billion short, that's a problem. But if you project it as, yeah, we're gonna bleed less money this year, and you meet those goals, that you're on the right track. And I think Uber is on the right track, so to speak.
I tend to agree, and right, they've welcomed other competitors into that same marketplace now, which is going to force them to get better at the type of stuff that they do. And they're working through a myriad of regulatory and legal hurdles, and so I think there's a lot of stuff that they're going to figure out as they go. So
Yeah.
it's just, it was a bonus just because I found it to be interesting at some level, and as a signal for you don't have to be Uber. Like you can be you and be really good at what you do, and still reference them as awesome, but do your own thing.
Hmm.
And then your journey is going to involve taking a meeting here in a minute or two.
Yeah.
My journey continues. I launched. I just put up some stuff. I learned some lessons. I'm going to write about it a little bit more in the coming week. And it really all that's happened is I've kind of like extended out the window of getting started in the course that I'm launching. But I have to tell you, I couldn't do this any other way. I've been around some great people, and they've not only helped me make the course better, they've already told me, Paul, flat out, hey, if you could give me XYZ service, I'll pay you for it.
There you go.
And so we could talk about that in the future, but I'll tell you what, it has been uplifting, and I'm grateful for it. And so a lot of the stuff that we talk about, we use, and it does work. And hopefully it will help you as you build your startup focused on security.
I hope our meeting right now results in version 1.0 of our product. That's the goal.
Oh, I'm excited.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Get on it, son. Get it done.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for watching Startup Security Weekly. We'll see everyone next week.